We're going to have a conversation with poet Alan King, who is generous enough to give us his words in this book. Okay, so go to the website and please order the book. You will not be disappointed. We're gonna just basically talk about the power of poetry and that it reconnects us to ourselves. So it's going to be an open conversation, and at the bottom of the screen there's a Q&A section. So please, as we're speaking, don't hesitate to ask questions. Okay. So welcome back, Alan, to the College of Southern Maryland. I have learned over the years that people have been conditioned to believe that poetry is something to be intimidated by. And I have several of my students in the room right now. And symbology, central metaphor, word choice, standardized testing, knowing the right answer, it's either A, B, C, or D, which I've learned unplugs the process of experience. And it doesn't give people a chance to ask themselves how they feel about what they've just read. But it turns out, as Alan reminds us, it's not about intimidation, grand gestures. It's about story, human story, which carries with it love and faith and family. Alan is a Caribbean American poet, a father, a husband, author of Point Blank, Drift, and Crooked Smiling Light. And U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo said, Alan King is one of my favorite poets. His poems are not about pop and flash, rather more like a slow dance with someone you're going to love forever. Someone you're going to love forever. And though we live in a world of uncertainty and strife and trial and tension, Alan's work reminds us that what matters most is we love to love and we love to be loved. And if you haven't seen it yet, you need to click on the link to see the joy Alan spreads on his back porch with his daughter, his wide smile, and his generous spirit, and his daughter's pleasure in being in the presence of her dad. What more do you want? It's my honor to welcome back to the College of Southern Maryland, my friend, Alan King.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's an honor to be back. Right, so while, I think if the questions have not come yet, they are percolating. So I'm going to go ahead and just read a poem. So lately, I've been writing a lot about my my family. Like last year, we just welcomed our now 20-month-old daughter, Jade Rose. So this poem I'm going to read is for her, and it's and if you have any questions about where the inspiration came from for this piece or why I wrote this poem, I'm open to answering those. So, a prayer for the bees. Bless them all, nature's letter carriers and freighters, their determination, like the busy engines of commerce, picking up and dropping off their haul. Bless this life of droning for the colony, working their sweet economy that sprouts the apples and pears cooling in your crisper drawer, the coffee grounded and brewed that kicks your senses awake. Let's not forget the butternut squash, the one your wife roasted into a savory soup. That's them too. You can still feel the gentle bite of ginger. Bless those that build the hive. Bless the ones that clean it. Bless the defenders. Bless the undertakers ushering away the dead and diseased to keep the colony healthy. Bless the nurses incubating the babies. And bless the bastards dropping to their death after a tryst with the queen. Could you do it, you wonder? Die for sex? Even if your life came down to that final task, even for the good of the colony, bless their bravery, bless their music streaming on your phone, their buzz, buzz, buzzing your fussy infant hears as a lullaby before letting it lull her back to sleep, before the whole house rests, grateful for their humble roles, their thankless sacrifices.
Thank you for that,
Mhm.
Ellen. I love the repetition of bless, 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 and the extent to which your work um, it blesses the fact of being alive. I I wanted to ask you about bless their music streaming on your phone, their buzz, buzz, buzzing. Your fussy infant hears as a lullaby before letting it lull her back to sleep. Could you talk a little bit about that stanza?
Sure, sure. So the interesting thing was with our first daughter, Jasmine. Jasmine, when she would get fussy, I don't know where the thought came from, but I remember like in a desperate attempt to try to calm her, I put my mouth to her ear and just do the bzzz, and she would calm down. So my wife and I were like, "Whoa!" So, uh, she, so that was a technique that we used to try to calm her, but we knew that doing that for a prolonged amount of time was not real. So we went on to YouTube and looked up ambient sounds, different kinds of white noise. And when we saw the bee sound, that's what, so Jasmine, we put her to sleep with that until she graduated from that and went to something else. But our 20 month old Jade Rose, um, she still sleeps to the bee sound. And it's funny, like a lot of our old cell phones get recycled as like her sound system. So we have it in her room, and when she goes down for a nap, we have the bee sounds on. Same thing at night. And so I wrote the poem because I was bathing her one day, and I had, she usually likes the bath, but she was a little fussy that day. And so I had my phone in the bathroom, like on the sink, and I just played the bee sounds, and then the poem came to me. And of course, I did all this research and learned a lot about the the bee species. But yeah, that's what was going on in those lines. When I talk about their buzz, buzz, buzzing, your fussy infant hears as lullaby. That's both of them did. They both let that sound lull them back to sleep. So, and we are grateful for those sounds because we've gotten a lot of peace because of those bee sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what it is. What is it? Like it's a low tone? Or like what
Yeah,
is that what it
yeah.
is?
It's
It's like a low tone instead
uh
of a, or maybe, I mean, what's the difference between a bee buzzing and like rain? Because I know those sounds.
yeah.
Yeah, they somehow lull us
Hmm.
into a kind of calm that we may not have, during the
Hmm.
day with all the stuff that we have going on. I do, however, Ellen, I have a couple of questions. Let me see if
Okay.
I can bring this up. Okay, let's start like this before we move on to another poem. So Braden asks, have you ever had a poem that what's a poem that you
Mhm.
wish you had written differently, and then
Mhm.
what would have changed? I mean, do you ever have, as a writer, did you ever have those moments of, oh man, I I should have said this
Mhm.
instead of this?
Definitely the first two chapbooks I put out in 2006 and 2007. At the time, I'm still proud of them. Like I'm proud of them for different reasons than I am when they came out. Initially, when they came out, I was excited to have something out. Excited because my friends and I that were doing chapbooks, we were using them as like business cards. So if we saw writers were respected, we would slide them a copy. So at the time, I was very proud of it. Was very proud of the work in there. And now, if I could look back at it, again, the first chapbook came out in 2006, second one came out in 2007. We're in 2022. When I look back, there's some poems that make me cringe. I mean, actually, the whole chapbook makes me cringe. But it's the reason why, though, and I don't think it's a bad thing that it does that. I think I would be worried if in 2022 I'm looking back at work from 2006 and I'm still excited about it and think it's the best thing that I've written at that time. So I think being able to look back at something you wrote maybe a month ago or however long ago, it's a sign of growth. It's a sign that you're still learning, you're still developing. And so, yeah, if I could, I would rewrite all those poems in those two chapbooks. And I remember I was even thinking about attempting it. And my wife was like, no, no, just leave them in that time period and start focusing on new stuff. And so, yeah, but I think with anything, if as you continue to grow, you're gonna look back at the work that you were once excited about, and you're gonna see where you can improve, and that's because I know more now, technique wise, than I did when I wrote those two chapbooks. So yeah, so not one poem, like two chapbooks, I would rewrite.
Thank you. This one is uh, this is from Patrick, and the question is difficult, and it might be a little generic, but how can poetry connect us to each other with all that's going on? I mean, even now, in Ukraine today, I think
Mhm,
I think he did it right. I mean, he's moving in.
mhm.
But racism and sexism, misogyny, what role does poetry play in helping us to be more peaceful?
Hmm. Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I think I can recall two instances when um poetry sales went up. So like it was I think right when the Black Lives Matter protests, like I think it might have been just before the pandemic, or no, it was after the pandemic with George Floyd. But like a lot of people wanted to learn more about you know, uh, Black culture, Black history. And so, in addition to searching these other books, the surprisingly, the sale of poetry went up. At the same time, too, when the pandemic started, I don't know if it was The Guardian. Trying to remember which. It was a few prominent publications talked about the sale of poetry going up because people were looking for poems to help make sense of, we were just at the beginning of this pandemic. So I think, poetry, it's, I'm going to steal from Martina Spada, but I think the reason why the sale of poetry is going up, the reason why people turn to poetry in their happy moments, people turn to poetry in their sad moments is because, as Martina Spada said, poetry helps make the abstract concrete. And so, when you think about it, people, you go out and you buy a card from Hallmark, which is kind of poetic, but people read poems at weddings, people read poems at funerals. And so I think what poetry does is, again, it makes the abstract concrete, but then I'm going to also take from a former professor of mine, Kate Johnson. So she said that while poetry and prose, you can humanize, certain groups of people because poetry allows for a smaller space than prose. She would also say that poetry is a shortcut to empathy. So I think, once in your search for something that makes sense, I think once you find that poem that like really brings it home for you, then it not only helps you make sense of what's going on, but then I think too, another role that poetry, and some of my favorite poets do this, is that it also helps show you the possibility. So if we're looking at racism, for instance, you can have a poem. There's some poems that attack it head on, but then there are some poems that look at the possibilities of us getting to a place of peace. And so I think to answer that question, the role of poetry again is to help make, the abstract happenings concrete. It's a shortcut to empathy, and it helps us see the possibilities of getting to where we want to get to.
That, thank you, Ellen, for that response. And I don't know how many of our students, well, I do. I mentioned it in the intro, are brought up to believe in the power of words and the power of poetry to do just exactly what you said. Like, in the intro, I said it's either A, B, C, but it's not. It's not. It is connecting and you know being reflective, and your work does that just
Thank you.
brilliantly. So thank you. How about another poem, and then we'll get back to some questions.
Okay. So this next poem I'm gonna read, there are some Star Wars references in it, and surprisingly, I'm not a huge Star Wars kid. My wife is though. My wife is, and my wife is older than me, so we debate which Star Wars series we like. Like, I tend to gravitate more toward the newer ones. For me, the older ones were too slow. My wife's like, no, it's a classic. You don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, so that's where, like the Star Wars references work their way in this poem. And it's a poem dedicated to the late poet Amiri Baraka. And it's also dedicated to the DC Writers Corps. It's called In Remembrance. And this was at a fundraiser in 2006. Just real quick, in Prince George's County, there is a place called the CAP Center. It's a town center. And the DC Writers Corps, which Kenny Carroll led, used to do a reading there like annually. And forget when it stopped, but the one year that he did it, he had Amiri Baraka with him, and I've always remembered that moment. So this is in remembrance, and again, it's for Baraka and the DC Writers Corps fundraiser in 2006. Daylight glazed the boulevard at Capitol Center before poetry made it our Typhon, the glad planet where weeping willows hang their chandeliers of waxy green light, where the emerald echo of sky ripples at the wind's cool urging. I remember the air seemed edible when the spicy sweet aroma wandered from Gladys Knight's chicken and waffles. You smiled, watching Padawan wordsmiths spar with the Council of First Knowledge, BJ Renegade and Laini Mataka, deflecting young lasers with their saber bright lines. Poets training in the Jedi Temple, in a city above the clouds, where the scent of mint plants was a fragrant finch, whisking a sweet aromatic trail through this world built of words. If poetry is a kind of prayer, a longing for the soul starved for revelation, then your sermons were a daily admission of America's weaknesses. You master word dancer, conjurer of the black cadabra, Yoda with his glow stick drawn when the dark forces crew up like the Sith Empire. I'm grateful for your owl spirit that sees beyond the mask, even if it meant McGreevy snatching your state laureate position for declaring somebody blew up America. I believe the Confederate flag needs to be flying. Talk about democracy and be lying. You declared it again on a Thursday in June before the sun, sky spider spitting its lacework of light, vanished. And you were an owl on fire calling, who, and who, before the rain, before the dead mic, before the anxious feet scrambling to shelter.
I have some questions coming
Mhm.
in, but that's a very, very powerful poem
Thank you.
that I wanted to start the next part of our conversation with asking you about, first of all, is poetry a kind of prayer?
hmm
Okay.
So, yeah, so I think so. And like I came to it because one of the things I love to do is like I love either reading or watching interviews of writers talking about their process. And so I think at one point I was trying to find I was trying to find a different kind of defense for poetry, because a lot of, I think what I was hearing at the time, like I believe in it, but if I'm talking with somebody who's not of that world or not in the literary space, I didn't think that the argument that the what I was hearing would be convincing. And so came to it because I think a few writers kind of made allusions to poetry as prayer. So again, Kate Johnson, the multi-genre writer who talks about again, getting at empathy. But then Tim Siebels, he did actually mention, the soul being starved for something, and he was saying what he was getting at with that was that for him, and I tend to agree, is that with poetry, unlike prose, poetry gets at something that a news story doesn't get at. Poetry goes deeper than an article can. And I'm pulling from so many places, but then again, Kate Johnson talking about poetry, how she believes poetry has a physiological impact on the human body. And so I said, well, with it having all these qualities, it has to be prayer like, because when someone's sick, you're oh sorry, when you're sick, someone you have your family members praying over you, asking for healing, and that's, and so yeah, I think it is a prayer. I think um I'm also a believer in, like, when you put, like, being careful what you say, because you can speak things into existence, and that's just coming from my faith. So I, when I'm writing a poem or when I'm reciting a poem, I'm always, I look at it as a prayer, because I'm saying, all right, whatever I'm saying or putting out there, in some way, I'm kind of like trying to will it to pass. So where that came from.
I love your attention to being careful, right, about
Hmm.
what you say, and being intentional, and not just spewing stuff out, you know.
Hmm.
And I think, to a certain extent, that might be contrary to the way our culture is now.
Hmm.
And it could be that, carefully chosen words put in carefully chosen order, might actually help people refocus, right?
Hmm.
You mentioned Tim Siebel's. I didn't want to say it, but he's the guy. He's the guy that put me in touch with you, and I thank him so much for that. um,
Me too. I'm always thinking too.
yeah. Um, so, I mean, I don't know where this line came from. Somebody blew up America. We believe the Confederate flag. We believe the Confederate flag need to be flying.
Hello.
Who talk about democracy and be lying? If you could
Hmm.
just mention a couple of words about that, because when I
Uh,
read that, I thought January 6th a year ago, and I don't want to go too political.
oh.
No, no, but what happened? And I know, I mean, this was 2006, but it
Hmm.
seems like history is sort of repeating itself, and
Yeah.
it oh, you mentioned Martin Espada. Um, when he came to the college, now it's like over a year and a half ago. He started talking about things that uh, were political. I mean,
Hmm.
controversial, which I think poetry, it gets to those issues, but in a kind of human way,
Hmm.
where you don't make you know you don't make statements. You just create a human experience for somebody
Hmm.
to read. And well, I Martine just kind of went off, and one of the students in my class that attended the reading dropped the class
Hmm.
because it was during the last election, and he just he turned her off, and she wrote to me and she said, here's the class description, and I did not sign up for a political science class, and so I'm done with it, right? But
Hmm.
it was in the context of floaters. Have you read that book from Martine? That
Not yet. Yeah.
it has to do with immigration
Hmm.
and people trying to, live a better life. Um, and she took serious offense to that. So I guess what I'm asking is about this Confederate flag, and uh, I know you couldn't have imagined,
Hmm.
January 6th from a year ago, but it turns
Hmm.
out there were tons of them there.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. So those lines, and so that's actually from, and that's why I have it in quote, "Somebody Blew Up America," the poem that cost Mary Baraka his poet laureateship. But it's, I think with history, it's, I mean, the sad thing is, if you don't learn from it, then the cliche repeats itself. And so um, I think, well, one of the things I'm noticing is that as it starts to look more and more like we're inching towards progress, you have those folks coming from the fringes and have like this alternative history. Like things were great the way they used to be. Like these are the folks coming out. And so I don't know. I mean, sadly, a lot of people are who didn't intend to be are their words are becoming prophetic. So they're writing about something from a period way back, and then it's replaying itself all over again. So I don't know much else what to say about it, I do think though that there is and I'm just going to put my opinion out there is a carelessness with what people put out there, what people speak, and then this trying to hide behind the freedom of speech, which freedom of speech does not protect hate speech, does not protect all that other stuff. But it's yeah. So I don't know what else to say.
Well, I think what you said earlier about being careful about what you say, right,
Hmm.
in your poetry, could be a really good message for people who just tend to just say whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
I I, I was behind a car driving back from DC, and they had a they had a sticker on the back of the car that was basically F Biden. You go, okay, okay, that's fine. You have your political opinion. Um, how come they couldn't put it on a license plate, right? They
Hmm.
I think there's like a distinction between free speech, but being careful about what you say.
Hmm.
Um, and and I think that's what your poetry reminds us of. It
Thank
is
you.
that you know carefully chosen words are extremely important, and I, I hope I hope that transfers beyond just this meeting, um,
Hmm.
and into other people's lives, so that you take a second, right, and
Hmm.
think about what you want to say before you say it.
Well,
um, Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'll say on that note, you know, I hate to sound like I'm going fanboy crazy, but Tim Siebel's he understands for people who read his work, he understands that if he has a message and he comes rah, ranting or comes whatever, right? The intended audience is going to shut itself off. So like Tim will use humor. He'll deceive you. He'll deceive his intended audience. And I talked to him about that. I was like, man, could you? And I think I read somewhere where they call him the master of the tickle punch poetry because he'll tickle you 1 minute, then punch it with the message, and then when you clam up again, he tickles you again. And he was like, yeah, he said, it's about, you put something. If you have a message that's going to be controversial, but you need it to get through to the intended audience. He said he makes that choice so that the intended audience is like, okay, this is not so bad. This is okay. I can get with this. I can whoa when the message comes, then and he'll just keep doing it over and over again. So I think, a lesson from that is if there is if you're having a conversation with somebody with different opinion from and I've heard stories from people who have successfully done this, was that they didn't come in careless with what they said and was like spewing all this judgment. They listened and then carefully pick their words to get their point across. And so, you know, I mean, not in all cases, but in some of the cases, like they were able to, I mean, the other person saw their side, but then in most cases, even if the other person didn't, you know, still didn't agree with their side, they could understand where they were coming from. So it's like when you're having these conversations with people on the other side of the fence, so to speak, you know, sometimes just coming carefully and thoughtfully, you know, you end up planting a seed in them. And, you know, maybe it germinates, maybe it doesn't, but I think in those instances, they're more receptive to hearing a different viewpoint. So,
Thank you for that, Alan. So Aiden wants to ask, you said you were bathing your daughter, and that's when you came up with your poem.
mhm.
Have you ever had a poem you thought of on the spot that ended up not working or not sounding right the more you worked on it?
Hmm. So, yes. So one of the interesting things, and one of the interesting things is and so I have to give this backstory before I go into this. So I do not do well carrying notepads with me, notebooks, anything with me, because then there's this expectation for me to create and nothing comes. So, and this was before cell phones, before the smartphones, and we can type on it. So a habit I've developed as a result of that is writing in my head. So like I may have a few lines and I may keep going with it and I'll keep repeating it to myself. And I think the time I start putting it down is maybe when I have about 3 or 4 stanzas in my head because I feel like it's enough for me to work with. And so, yeah, sometimes, you know, I always like joke and say when I'm showering, my best ideas come, like some things come. And sometimes I'll have some poems coming to me and I'll like, you know, I have this internal editor trying to edit while I'm coming up with the lines in my head. And so, yeah, there've been like a few poems that I thought I would put down on the paper, but then when I came back to it, you know, those lines in my head, you know, they didn't make sense. I think it was those lines came, you know, from an emotional space, but it didn't work when I tried to add craft to it. So then I knew it wasn't worth me pursuing, at least at that moment. So yeah, there've been instances where I've had poems before they even make the page that didn't work, and then I think the most frustrating thing is when something makes it to the page and I want it to work so bad, especially if I haven't written in a while and I need this. But it's yeah, there's frustrating when I have to say, yeah, I have to scrap it because it's not going anywhere and it's not accomplishing what I needed to.
I I just want to go back to Aiden's comment about bathing your daughter. Like, where do you, how do you come up with in the intro, I mentioned the fact that it's, family and faith and love, but um, how does bathing your daughter create a poem for you?
So,
Or let me
uh,
try this one. Okay, if you don't want to do the bathtub anymore, or
oh,
if you do, that's fine. But you remember that story you told me about when you wanted to sleep in another room, and
ah,
maybe you can tell us that.
yes, yes. So I can't go in that room anymore because that's where the 20-month-old sleeps now. That's the nursery. But before it was the nursery, it was a guest room, was an extra room. And I used to go into that room all the time because our firstborn would always keep ending up in our bed. And I remember my wife and I getting into it because I was like, I don't want her in the bed because I can't sleep. You know, she's a very, I mean, you'll wake up with a knee in your ribs, you know, you're fighting all night, you know, you're not getting any sleep. So my wife was adamant that she was going to sleep in the bed. So I was like, okay. So my way of getting back at my wife was going into the guest room And I remember when I did that initially, I was like, oh man, she took over my bed. Da-da-da-da. But when I woke up the next day, and I was like, whoa, that was some really good sleep. you know, so that was why I was that's why I love that room so much. But I'll jump back to the bath, the question about the where the poems come from. So I want to say this was like 2019, yeah, before the pandemic. I was on a panel, and each of us were asked about our process, our creative process. And I said, with me, what I've learned is, or what I know is that my process. So I've never been one of those folks that have like a rigid process, and I think for for folks who have that, I'm not knocking it. I think whatever works for folks, whatever works for you is fine. For me, I've always kind of had like a more loose, relaxed process of creating, and it changes. It changes. My process changes depending on my life circumstance. So to give you an example, when I was single, my process was different. I was always out. I was always people watching, always gathering. But then when my wife and I started dating, and my wife wanted to spend more time with me, and I couldn't do that, my process shifted to include my wife in my life. So then I found another way of being able to create around her. And then so we have kids. We have kids now, and so that process has shifted to allow for them. And so what ends up happening is that because that process is loose, because it's flexible and it allows for room for, new things happening in my life. I mean, poems come from unexpected moments, So when I was bathing my daughter, I was not even thinking of writing anything. And I remember, having the bee sounds on, soaping her and everything, and the buzzing, like I was thinking about her big sister Jasmine, and just all, our experience with Jasmine, that moment in the bathroom, and just like other things that those B sounds trigger, just all hit at once. And I was like, huh. And then some lines started coming. And then right after I dried her off and, got her ready, I think my wife took her to do some with, I started researching, looking up, you know, the bee colony, like how it functions, and so everything I read, like I was surprised because there are certain bees delegated to be nurses. There are certain bees delegated to clean the hive. And so it just all came together. And but that's like one of, I've lost count of like how many moments like I'm not intending to write anything, but something comes, and I think again it's because of the way my process has shifted over time. So it's to where any situation can spark a poem.
I mean, would it surprise you if I told you that um, I've heard on many occasions students say to me that my life isn't worth writing about,
Oh man.
even though, yeah, because I mean, we're reading Chaucer and Shakespeare, and but my life, and go, well, yeah, right. And the idea that, you know, a lot of people think that their life is not worth reflecting upon and writing about the way you just described. I
Mhm.
mean, I think that's a very important reminder. So thank you for
Well,
that.
I'll say to that too, like, everybody has a lived experience that somebody else has experienced, either maybe the same thing, or may have experienced, anyway, what I'm getting at is that, and I'm just putting this out there to the folks in the room, is to not underestimate your life and your lived experiences, because you don't know. You may write a poem and think you're just writing about something you're going through, went through, or something you celebrated. And when that work connects with somebody, whether they read it somewhere or whether they hear you read it somewhere, you'll be surprised when because it does happen. Somebody will come up and say, "Hey, I thought I was the only one," or "I needed to know that I heard in your piece that you made it through. I needed to know that that was possible." So don't underestimate the power of your lived experience, because you don't know how somebody's going to connect with it and what it's going to do for them. So,
I just before we move on to one more poem for the hour, first I have two questions. The first one is, how do you think people get the impression that their lives don't matter?
mhm,
Okay. Um, and that they're not worth writing about, when you take something like bathing your daughter and you turn it into this beautiful piece of work. I mean, like, how do people get so to the point of saying, no, 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 whatever I live, it really doesn't matter? And I mean, and even, you know, why should I write it down? Or is that
mhm.
what Instagram is for? Is that what, like, what's the deal with that? I mean, do people feel like their lives don't matter? Or, how do you wrap your brain around? mm, I've, like I said, I've had students tell me, no, I've never been asked how I feel about my life. Um,
Mhm.
but where do you think it comes from?
I I can see, I can definitely see, being a young person and feeling like I haven't lived enough, because I mean, it's in our society, you get, I mean, it's trickled down that you have to have experience, in order to be an expert on something. And so, when you're young and you're like, oh, okay, well, what am I going to say to somebody? And I'm still living and learning. So that's part of it. The other part of it is, and I know in my case, it wasn't until high school that we were, reading poets that I could relate to, that I could say, oh man, yeah, I know this person that they're talking about. And so I think, it comes from different things. Again, I think it comes from what's in our society, of how our society views experts, because, you know, um, y- uh, you kind of, sort of, when you're writing about something, you kind of taking on this role of an expert because you're putting it out there. And so, but I do understand that, like feeling like not having anything worth saying. So I think for me, the best thing for me was in high school, senior year of high school, because I would not have been writing about my experiences like this if it wasn't for my English teacher, Mr. Grimes. And he, like I've had other teachers teach me poetry and I enjoyed it, but Mr. Grimes was like my first poet, the first poet that I met. And when I say that, like, yeah, he was teaching us Shakespearean sonnets and, different rhyme schemes and all this. But then he would take those, like, classical forms and flip it. He'll say, oh, I created a rhyme scheme. And he did a sonnet in his own rhyme scheme. And then so after he taught us that, then he would say, "Hey, is it okay if I read some of my poems to y'all?" And we're like, "Sure." He said, "I want to try something out." And so I asked him, I said, "Well, why do you want to try them out? What are you going to do with your poems?" He said, "I'm going to the open mic and read them on there." And I was like, "Whoa! So there's an audience for this? Like, there's a place where you can, because at the time, I was writing, but I had my stuff in journals and only took it out like if I wanted certain people to hear it. But I did not know that there was a literal stage to really go out and connect with people. And so I think just his presence, his experience as a poet, like him bringing that into the classroom, not only showed me what the potential for poetry, but he was writing about his life. He was writing about, and he's a teacher, so he was reading appropriate love poems for the class, but he wrote about what he was experiencing. And so seeing that, I was like, oh, I can do that too. I can write about my own experiences, and just get it out there. And then it wasn't until much later it was about connecting with other people. But I think, again, what's helpful is maybe having some examples of people in life that's doing it, and kind of, no, it's kind of, I don't want to say weird, but in some way it kind of gives you permission to do it. Like I know when I saw him doing it, I felt like I had permission to write about my own life. So
I love the idea that of Mr. Grimes, and um, yeah, you can teach Shakespeare and all these other things, but then you start reading your own stuff, and then all of a sudden it transfers on to the
hmm
students, and they go, "Whoa, I can do this," right?
hmm
All right, thank you, Alan. How about one more poem?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
All right. So this last poem I'm going to read is for my daughter Jade Rose, and it's also for George Floyd. The Land of Innocence for Jade Rose and George Floyd. A YouTube clip shows a protest ignited after police killed George Floyd, torched SUVs, overturned cop cars, armored officers retreating. All of that sinks my wife into a deeper postpartum, having made it through our personal crisis. We watched the python of despair coil itself around America, blowing out glass storefronts and colliding angry bodies as the tension constricts and crushes. We're miles from the mayhem, but a different kind of danger finds us in the maternity ward, a decreasing heartbeat, frenzied nurses rushing my wife to the OR, surgeons scrambling to save our daughter. Watching the news, I'm reminded of slogans on chaos as necessity. Real discoveries come from chaos. Chaos is beautiful and full of fertility. But when it's a violent pattern of reactions, what's the real discovery? Where's the beauty in things shattered and tagged if the same pattern of injustice ripples our lives? So maybe chaos isn't the right word. Let's try instead challenge. And since it means refuting the truth or its validity, isn't a protest a public dispute of someone else's truth? Like the one about the fear of dark bodies, how it justifies them being mangled or discredited in news cycles. Wouldn't the beauty then be new laws that get us closer to becoming the people the Constitution claims it protects? Let me begin again. When my wife told me several months ago she was pregnant, we knew the challenge of this birth could take her life, just as the challenge in the hospital threatened our daughters. And isn't it an act of faith to go blindfolded into the future and be delighted by the light there? Now we're lit by a dancing star named Jade, short for Jadisola, which in Yoruba means come into wealth. She's jade like the green stone, perfectly lit wisdom and clarity. I'm feeding her while watching the YouTube video. Someone on screen yells, "We're better than this!" And she squeals, mouth dripping with her mother's milk, smiling while dreaming her baby dreams. The land, that land of innocence, where it all starts before we lose our way back, rationalizing our destruction.
Thank you for that one too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't even know where to start with that. That's just a beautiful poem. That's a beautiful poem, Alan. And I highlighted a lot of things. I think when I read the poem again last night, I was intrigued by the way you can put, you know, public events together with private events, and how
Mm,
they intertwine, right? They
mhm.
they um they go together somehow. Like I don't I think it's really well done.
Thank you.
I mean, her mouth is dripping with her mother's milk, but then, I mean, you started it by talking about George Floyd. So I mean, like I think it's really a nice combination of human experience, both painful and joyful at the same time, in one
Thank you.
poem. Okay, I have one more question, and then I guess we can call it a day. So Aiden asks about social media, and has, like, I mean, I know you're very active, and
Mm.
I guess the question is, you know, how do you employ social media to make sure that people know what an incredible poet you are?
Well,
You
uh,
wouldn't you wouldn't say it like that, but
no, that's why I was
even
laughing.
a videographer, no, but even like the videos that you have, just they're brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I mean, so the video piece, I got into videography accidentally. And when I say accidentally, like the previous job I was at, they there was an event or something going on in Philly, and they bought me a ticket, had me go up to Philly and just capture like the event happening. And with no training, I went up there with two cell phones. And so, but then that got me into when I came back and I put something together that they were happy with, but then I started exploring that. And then you know, the night class and all that stuff really pulled me into that world. So that's how I got into that. And so knowing what I know with that, I'm always giving myself projects. So, and so that's when I started doing videos for the poems. With social media, I've always been active on it. But then the two came together because I was like, well, um, I'm, like I like marketing and not just myself, but other people. And for me, I actually enjoy it. I know some writers don't, but I actually enjoy, putting some things out there and just see how people react to it. And so, really, it's just, being being mindful of like which platforms are worth my time. But if you're going to be a writer, I think it's good to get comfortable with social media. I'm actually a part of a Twitter chat with it's what's it, hashtag book marketing chat, and there are writers in that chat. It ranges from like people just starting out to people surprisingly being like New York Times best-selling authors, and but they're all sharing ways that they've promoted their work, and it's free information, but the understanding in that group is that as a writer, you're going to have to try to find some way to get around the noise, because there's a lot happening. And so if you're going to try to get your work out there, you have to figure out a way to get around that noise. And so being comfortable with social media is one way of doing that.
Okay, my last comment, thank you for that, is that you're right, a lot of noise. But when I reread your book, I felt like I did one time when friend of ours, Michael Glazer from St. Mary's College, he put together a collection of Lucille Clifton's poems, and all the electricity went out, and I just sat with that book, and I had the same feeling with your book.
Oh,
So
thank
there
you.
was no noise, and it was just calm and quiet and mindful in a way that I think so, you know, as interesting as it is, and you're right, I mean, you got to get your words out there somehow. I mean, but the words that you give in this book, and please everybody, okay, the link on the website to buy the book, they tap down all that noise, right? The poems, they calm a person, they quiet you down to get you to a point where you don't feel so distracted by everything going on all the time. But platforms are good, and I guess if there are no more, I don't think there are any more questions, but we've gone on for an hour. And I want to end. Oh, there she is.
I wanted to say hi, Alan.
Hey, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. This is my granddaughter.
Oh.
One of two.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Your book is wonderful. The reading was great. The questions, and actually a lot of what you guys covered. I don't know how it happened that way, but Neil and I have been talking about all of it, and it's just really, really well done. So good to see you. Thank you so much for coming back. And hopefully we can see each other in person soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thank you, Alan, for coming back to the College of Southern Maryland and sharing your incredible poetry with our students. I really do appreciate it. I mean, it kind of came out of the blue, but thank you.
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me. You know, if you ask my wife, she'll tell you, you know, how excited I was to be doing this and looking forward to it. So I really appreciate it.